Welcome back, fellow kids of culture. This is going to be my full in-depth breakdown of Grimgar Ashes and Illusions, including my top 5 reasons why I love this show. I'll also be including things from the light novels. If you haven't seen the show yet, I've got another video linked down in the description that tells you why I think you'd love it. Also, it's spoiler-free, whereas this one will absolutely be filled with spoilers. Like, we're talking you left a protein shake in the car during summer and now you've created a new ecosystem. Spoilers. So just to be abundantly clear, if you don't want spoilers, this is your last chance to click away. Beyond this point, you really only have yourself to blame. We good? Okay, cool. Let the rambling begin. The show opens with a gorgeous watercolor backdrop, painting the scene of our party engaging in their first real fight with a lone goblin. Even though it's 1v6, they're struggling. Badly. Our first impressions are left wanting for sure. The goblin is about the size and demeanor of a kindergartner jacked up on Mountain Dew, and he fights like one too.
I'm all jacked up on Mountain Dew!
I love that.
He's small, but he's tenacious and has that crackhead energy for sure. But we also see something new in this NPC enemy. He has some intelligence and a sense of humor, albeit twisted. He knows he's in a fight against superior numbers, so he weeds out the weakest and most vulnerable member of the party, Chihiro, and nearly kills her. She's only alive because Minato comes to the rescue. We don't see it on screen, but our party was clearly forced to retreat. At camp, Minato is patient and understanding, and instead of yelling at them all for being weak and incompetent, "You hear that, Dad?" Just kidding, he can't hear me. He's dead. He suggests they try again tomorrow by looking for a weaker, lone goblin and ambushing him. He then foreshadows an ill-fated death in the party by stating that while he can heal wounds, he can't replenish lost blood. This whole scene is the first reason why I just love this show. We're just watching our party sit around a fire and dinner table in their lodging area in what looks to be a community square. Nothing exciting is happening, but we feel like we're there. Like we could suddenly decide to speak up and just join the conversation. It's subtle, but between the soft palette watercolor background, ambient music, quiet but distinct background noises, the natural conversational manner in which our party is speaking with each other, and the consistency of the various characters' personalities peeking through, we feel like we're in Grimgar. The world of Grimgar is a fantasy world, like so many others we've seen in dozens if not hundreds of other isekai and fantasy adventure type anime, but it's one of the very few that does such a complete job of making this world feel immersive and real. They even have a functioning economy and explain the costs of lodging, food, gear, repairs, and more. You realize that the starting seed coins Brittany gives them in episode 1 is only enough to last a few weeks. They're essentially forced into choosing between indentured servitude, fighting monsters that can easily kill you, or starve to death. Not the ideal start to your new life in a fantasy world. You also notice that most of the villagers in Alterna aren't exactly in love with these new recruits. They tolerate them, but it's evident that they don't really belong. They're there to serve a purpose, which is to provide essentially free security to the city of Alterna and boost the economy by sourcing rare materials from nearby enemy-infested areas that would be too dangerous for a merchant to acquire. Our characters set off on their own, after each learning a job that benefits the party. We get more insights into why each member chose their roles in the light novel 14+. The next day they scout out various areas, looking specifically for a lone goblin they can realistically take on. They eventually find one, and while our party is genuinely trying to beat this goblin, they're struggling. Badly. Yume and Shiro both miss their opening shots, and Ranta is just doing his best with all the extra chromosomes he's got. The party surrounds the goblin and slowly whittles it down, landing more and more blows on this wounded goblin. This is when we see it. There's desperation in this goblin. He's not just an NPC who exists just to be killed by adventurers. He has his own thoughts, needs, wants, and fears. This goblin is another person, just like the rest of our party, even if he's not human. He hasn't done anything to provoke or attack our party. He was simply getting water in a nearby stream. Our party attacked and killed him in cold blood, and all for the necklace he was wearing so they could afford to buy food and supplies for the next day. The lines between good versus evil aren't as clearly defined as they are in most anime. It's about survival. This desperation affects how the goblin fights. His battle cry as he realizes he's about to die is bone-chilling and sad. He lunges at Haruhito and nearly kills him, attempting to strangle him to death. We feel the terror of both parties in this intense fight for their lives. It gets even worse when Ranta finishes off the dying goblin in the most savage and unfeeling way possible, and Chihiro nearly faints from the sheer brutality. After the goblin finally breathes his last, Ranta, who was hyped and tenacious just a second ago, is now quivering, crying, and having a complete breakdown. Haruhito is shaking so badly he can't even let go of his dagger. They took a life. This person, this goblin, was a living being that didn't want to die. If you hear stories of soldiers who come back home and talk about their first kills, it's never filled with glory. It's shock. It's trembling. It's horror. You see what your hands have done, and realize you're the reason this person will never breathe again, never see their loved ones again, and that it just as easily could have been you lying there motionless. Grimgar does an amazing job of making you feel this weight, and it adds to the world building and immersiveness. Reason number 2 why I love this show is that we don't actually know where these characters came from or why they're all here. It's implied that maybe they're from a version of our Earth, since they occasionally mention things like cell phones or video games. But even when they mention these familiar words or phrases that don't exist in Grimgar, they suddenly forget the meaning or why they said it in the first place. It's like they're being forced to forget their old world and lives. But why? They don't tell you in the first season for sure. Even in the light novels, you get clues and teasers here and there, but never any outright explanation of who brought them here or why. There's a certain mystery element to the story behind the scenes, and I personally love that kind of thing. It's another example of how Grimgar chooses to show instead of tell. By contrast, most isekai tell us, usually through narrative exposition, exactly who our characters are, how they got to this new world, and usually what their express purpose in being summoned is. Usually it's to save the kingdom/world from some catastrophe, or simply because Truck-kun wanted to give you a hug. But regardless of the reason, we as the audience are told what the quest or reason for our hero's emergence is. It gives us something to look forward to, which helps us stay involved in the story. But in Grimgar, there isn't one, or at least not one that is readily apparent to us. Because of that, we're more focused on the characters in this story, instead of the plot progressing to the next step. The only progression we're really concerned with is the growth of our characters, both physically and emotionally. And that brings me to reason number 3. The characters. I am a sucker for well thought out and realistic characters. Our party of characters is such a weird mess of wildly different personalities, and we see the issues that would occur naturally if all those kinds of people were forced to work and live together overnight. They bicker and argue, and some of them Ranta piss off almost everyone they talk to. But we'll come back to Ranta later. Let's talk about the party leader, Minato. He's charming, relaxed, patient, kind-hearted, and clearly the most talented member of the party. In fact, he's the only reason there's an episode 2, because let's be honest, the entire party would have been wiped out by that goblin in the first episode if it wasn't for Minato. He's clearly out of place, and frankly, out of their league. You can see this readily, not only in the fights, where he's a great strategist, leader, and backline fighter, but also in Haruhito's internal dialogue, where Haru essentially worships him. Minato represents ideal strength, without any toxicity, and he somehow makes it seem achievable. He becomes the benchmark for Haruhito moving forward into the story, especially once he takes over the role of party leader. Haruhito is almost always overwhelmed. He seems to function at like 95% anxiety levels on a regular basis. He's clearly got a good mind for being a leader, but because of the weight of his responsibility, the crushing guilt and grief of losing a party member, and just his overall insecurities in general, he constantly doubts himself. It's relatable. How many times have we been told by somebody we're good at something, or they enjoyed something we did, only for our internal lizard brain to completely dissect every aspect of their compliment until we've fully and utterly removed any possibility they were correct? Yeah, me neither. He's painfully aware of the canyon between his combat and leadership skills and Monato's, but he continues to push ahead, because that's what his party needs. He doesn't have all the answers or skill, but he just does what he can in the safest and smartest way he knows how. And gradually we see him grow, even if he doesn't see it himself. If you've read the books, you know this trend continues forever, as this idol worship of Minato and his own insecurities blind him to the massive amount of growth he's accomplished. About halfway through the books, Haruhito becomes an absolute unit without realizing it, defeating enemies that would have been able to kill the entire party at the start of the story. And yet he still views himself as weak. This deep, innate feeling of constantly needing to be better and stronger in order to make up for what he lacks is exactly why this aggressively average guy becomes such a strong and capable leader. There's such a great message in that too, you know? It's okay to not inherently be crazy gifted or talented right off the bat. They say the smartest and most talented people often view themselves as comparatively untalented or dumb. That level of awareness drives their determination to never stop learning or growing. And speaking of dumb, there's Yume. She's the quintessential airhead girl that we all know and love, while secretly protecting them from themselves. She's definitely not the brightest as far as book smarts go, but she's so sweet and cute that we don't really mind. It's implied she has some undiagnosed learning deficiency, as she's constantly mishearing people or using the wrong words, but it doesn't dampen her spirits, even when Ranta constantly makes fun of her. She's not a burden in combat at all. She's completely fearless, openly taking to the front lines despite not being a tank or even wearing armor. She's very capable and quick on her feet, and she synergizes well with Haruhito. They have this budding friendship, and their connection becomes one of my favorite little things in the show. She also views herself as kind of the protector of the vulnerable and emotionally much weaker Shihiro. She has no problem standing up to Ranta and defending Shihiro from his pervy and hurtful comments, while simply blowing off his comments directed at her. Oh, Shihiro. She has probably the most impressive and massive growth of anyone in the party. When we first meet her, she's by far the weakest link. She has the emotional and mental fortitude of a Kleenex, while being more of a burden to her party than the rest of the Lakers are to LeBron. She's annoying, cries all the time, sucks at fighting, and is mousy. Like when Ranta ogles her and comments on her chesticles repeatedly, she just takes it. Gets insecure, which is totally normal, because who wants some random creep saying that stuff to them while also drawing the attention of those around you? When he constantly comments on her chest or curves, she says repeatedly that she only has them because she's so fat. He plays it off as that one girl, we all know which one, that is naturally curvy and fit, perfectly beautiful, but swears she's ugly and fat, etc. When we both know full well she doesn't really think that. She knows she's gorgeous and is just mock playing at humility. Shihiro isn't that girl. She's deeply, horribly insecure, to the point of having body dysmorphia. She genuinely thinks with all her heart that she's this disgusting, ugly, obese loser. If you read the books, you'll know this goes on more and more, to the point where you just feel bad for this poor girl. And when you get to her memories of her past life growing up, man, does it make perfect sense in the most heartbreaking way. But remember I mentioned that she has probably the best growth of them all? Well, in the books, not only does she become terrifyingly powerful, but she obtains this massive power, not only by training, but essentially by breaking the rules of magic. She becomes courageous, cool-headed, reliable, and becomes almost a second leader to the group. She ends up becoming Haruhito's best friend and most trusted advisor, and just overall cool. She goes from being one of the most annoying characters in the show to by far one of your favorites. So, speaking of the most annoying character in the entire show, we have Ranta. Good lord, I have never wanted to punch a fictional character in the face more than this piece of crap. He's self-obsessed, rude, openly insubordinate, and worst of all, an utter perverted degenerate. His only redeeming quality is that he becomes very reliable and competent in fights, which is ultimately the only reason to be in a party, so that's basically the only reason they keep him around. But beyond his facade, we see probably the most insecure person in the show, even more than Haruhito or Shihiro. That might not make sense after everything I just said about Shihiro, but if you watch this show and instantly connected Ranta's character to someone you know personally, it makes sense. Those kinds of braggart, showboating, look at me and how cool and edgy and rude I am, people are the ones that despise themselves deep down. It's not just a physical or mental thing, they hate themselves. They act out because typically their home life is horrible. They're abused or ignored entirely. They're told they're nothing and they will never have their parents' approval. So they have no reason to feel respect for others because they were never shown it themselves and they grew up not seeing a reward for being a decent human being. They act out socially, often with edgy or shocking comments and actions because they just desperately want attention, even if it's bad attention, to the point where they don't care how that attention affects themselves or others. They're just happy to have attention at all. That's also why they seem to always brag about exaggerated or outright untrue things, aka I'm a world-class black belt in karate, chess grandmaster, and I also have an astrophysics PhD from Hogwarts, because they crave approval and want to impress others. They're not getting any of that at home. It's sad, but it's not an excuse to be a crappy person. Ranta probably has the second best glow up in the story, especially in the books. He goes from being this lecherous, selfish, greedy, bloodlusted moron to a truly selfless person who values, and I would go so far as to say loves, his teammates. He sacrifices for his teammates, even ones he's not a fan of. He's another one that makes total sense once we learn of his childhood. For Ranta, having a party that never abandoned him and strived to look for the good in him, regardless of how much he tried to push them away, helped him move beyond his past and learn to trust others. The first person to genuinely get him and befriend him anyways is Moguzo, the party's tank. He's a gentle giant, the true definition of speak softly but carry a big stick. Or sword, in this case. He loves to cook and is more of a follower, but has a heart of gold. We see more of his growth in the second light novel, which would end up being season 2, if we ever get one. He becomes so strong that he's able to fight alongside Renji, which is probably the best compliment you can get in Grimgar. Later on, the party gets a new priest named Mary. She has straight up PTSD after losing her last party. She blames herself for not being able to heal them enough to keep them alive as she ran out of mana mid-fight. Because of this, she comes off cold and brutal, refusing to heal anything that isn't life-threatening. This is a massive culture shock to the party, who was used to Minato healing every little wound they had. But then again, because of that exact thing, they understand why once she tells them her story. It makes sense, and it's a sobering reminder of what happened to them just a few weeks before. Mary is able to finally get some closure later on when the party goes to the mines where her old party died, and we see a switch in her personality. She becomes much more warm and open, especially with Haruhito. Now we get to the part we all hated but saw coming. I mean, you'd have to be blind to not notice the foreshadowing of Manato's death. It's heartbreaking for the party, and I absolutely love the scenes of Shihiru's breakdown and Haruhito and Yume mourning in each other's arms. Props to the voice actors in these scenes, because man, it hits hard. But we feel the pain of not only losing their good friend, and for Shihiru her crush, but they also lost their leader and their most powerful asset. And this is reason number 4 why I love this show. The consequences. We talked about how realistic this show is in the last video, but this episode drives it home perfectly. The party leaned way too heavily on Minato because he was so reliable instead of diligently trying to get stronger and better to lighten his load and keep the party safe. The other characters don't take it seriously enough. It's shown in how carelessly they get wounded, even superficially. Ranta and Haruhito are constantly taking stupid risks and getting cut or stabbed, and it's purely because they don't think things through enough. It reminds me of when you're learning to ride a bike with training wheels on. You can pretty much do whatever you want without fear of falling or getting hurt. But it's a completely different animal once those wheels come off. Now you have to fill in the gap for what the training wheels did for you. Namely, keeping your balance, maintaining enough speed to do so, learning to turn without falling over, and more. For our party, Minato was their training wheels, life vest, airbag, and Narcan all in one. And because he never complained or chewed them out, they went on without noticing until it was too late. Minato can't even heal himself because he's out of mana, and he prioritized getting the rest of them to safety so much that he bled out and had no strength left. Our party learns that day the weight of their situation. It could have been any one of them. But also, they can't afford to be lax about this world. It's not a game, and people can easily die from one wrong move or not knowing your limitations. There are other consequences we see in Grimgar of a different kind, and it sets it apart from most anime. Let's talk about the pervy character trope. We see it in nearly every anime nowadays. There's a creepy guy, usually older, who constantly flirts with every female he sees in the most demeaning way possible. Instead of saying you think someone is pretty and nice and you'd like to get to know them better, they just try to grope them or sexually harass them. In the end of episode 2, Ranta sneaks off to the bathhouse because the girls are bathing. The other guys try to stop him, but only with words. They ultimately let him go, which is a huge miss on their parts morally speaking. Ranta gets beat up by Yume and threatened with worse if he ever tries to pull that stunt again. And this is usually where other anime stop. It's played down for laughs, as though violating someone's trust and robbing them of security and peace of mind isn't that big of a deal. Yeah, you might get slapped, but then afterwards things go back to normal. But that's not what happens in real life. And it's not what happens here. Yume wasn't just mad at Ranta for being a pervert, but also for the guys for not forcibly stopping him. Her anger is perfectly justified, and in the scene where she's scolding them, we see that Shihiro can't even look at them without being embarrassed. She hides behind Yume like a scared child hiding behind their parent. Even later in the episode when the party is camping out, the girls are under their own tent, away from the guys. Haruhito makes casual eye contact with Shihiro, and she becomes so overwhelmed and embarrassed that she immediately pulls back and hides. Yume and Haruhito advance ahead to scout, and she tells him it's going to take a while before Shihiro becomes comfortable with them again. She mentions that if it was Haruhito that saw them, assumingly by accident, that she wouldn't be as upset about it because he'd genuinely be sorry. She forgives him finally with a punch, and then reminds him again that forgiveness doesn't mean it was okay. This is really well done, and sadly rare in anime. In society, there are already enough issues with how men and women treat each other, and the last thing we want boys and young men learning is that it's okay to take advantage of women, or view and treat them as nothing but sexual objects while devoid of any remorse or guilt. There are lasting consequences to violating someone's trust, and they often last for years, if not forever. This is the fifth reason why I love this show. Because it treats the viewer like an adult. We see this in how it shows instead of tells. We see it in the nuance and relatability of our characters. We see it in the world building. We see it in the consequences. We see it in the way it portrays the goblins and other enemies. Nothing is one-dimensional and nothing is taken for granted. There's no hand-holding, and there's not a whole lot of shiny to distract you or cause hype to avoid a lull in the natural progression of a linear plot. We don't know what the future holds for our party, and we don't really care as much about that compared to how much we care about seeing their individual growth and personal relationships. There's no forced romance or simping harems. Each character gets their own moments to shine and their own complexity. These things make us invested in the story and crave more. And as an author, what more could you want? Now on to the bad. And there's not much here, but I'm objective, so I gotta call out the fan service. And honestly, it's mostly just Sensei Barbara, Haruhito's thief trainer. Good lord, there's no reason for her to be wearing that, aside from maybe a femme fatale thing, but if that's the case, then why is she wearing it in her own home? I don't need to see fan service to keep my attention in a story. In fact, it takes away from how great this show is. But that aside, the only other issue I have with Grimgar Ashes and Illusions is that we've waited years and there's still no announcements for Season 2. It's the studio's fault for not promoting it enough, to be honest, but I'm still holding out hope. Anyways, that's about all I've got for now. Overall, I think this show's a masterpiece. Is it for everyone? Definitely not. The pacing is intentionally slower, and that's not for everyone. There's not a ton of shiny or telling, and sadly for some people, that's a requirement. But if you're watching this video, I'm assuming you've already watched it. That or you're some kind of psycho that loves spoilers and probably pours ketchup on top of your fries. So if you've watched Grimgar, let me know in the comments what you liked or disliked about it. I'll try to post new videos every week, and I'll try to find a balance between popular titles and hidden gems. If you subscribe, you'll never have to miss a video. Thank you so much for listening to The Rambling. If you have a suggestion of a show you think is underrated, let me know. Take care, and have a great day, you beautiful beasts.